Hi there, my name's Allison Keating, and I'm a long-term care administration major at USF. And for this video, I'm going to be presenting my Tableau project for my information systems class. First I just want to describe the kind of data that I was presented with. And from my understanding, it's a lot of bicycle sales data, and it included, the item of the sale, the location of the sale, the profit, all that good stuff. And really the first thing I wanted to know was if this company's sales were profitable. So I just put together this simple line graph with the data, and I was really happy to see that the company is making a profit and has been these past 5 years, with 2017 being particularly lucrative. I do just want to point out that when I was looking at the data, what I have for 2018 is just for the first half of the year. So that could be why their sales and profits are a bit lower. And maybe once I were to get the second half, it would be a little higher than what it's showing right now. But it's still showing a profit, so I still felt like it was a good place to start. So once I saw this, the next question that came to my mind was if these profits differ by location or time of year. So to answer that question, I expanded upon my first worksheet to see if there were any trends. And I've broken it down by region. So central, east, south, and west. And what I can see is that the central, east, and west regions have some pretty high peaks and then some low points too, where their sales and profits are a little bit lower. But the southern region doesn't have those drastic peaks as much. It's a little bit flatter, and I just thought that that was interesting. I also noticed from this graph that June in particular is a pretty low sales month for all of the regions, and I just attributed that to being kind of a hot summer month and maybe people not wanting to buy bikes and be outside as much. So the next thing I decided to do was make a profit map. And with this, I really just wanted to see if certain states weren't profitable. But again, I was really happy to see that all the states seem to be making a profit. In particular, California, New York, Pennsylvania, and Texas are really standing out the most. And if you look at the central and southern parts of the map, they have a lot more of these kind of lighter green, teal colored states, meaning their profits aren't as high as some of the other ones. And this was kind of my starting point to dive deeper and see if there's certain products that are bringing these profits down, and if I can zero in and make some recommendations from there. So speaking of products, what I did next was determine what products are actually selling. So in this bar chart, you can see that the products that this company is selling, the bikes, fall into three main categories. There's mountain bikes, road bikes, and triathlon bikes. And the triathlon bikes have the lowest sales and profits across all four regions down here. And Tableau has this really neat, handy toggle filter that I like to use for filtering the years. And using this, I can kind of see if this trend happens consistently, or maybe triathlon bike sales had one or two bad years. But as I toggle through the years, it's clear that triathlon bike sales are lower than the road and mountain bikes. So it's not, just one outlier year or anything like that. They're consistently lower. And across, when I go back here to display all the years, the South in particular has the lowest of the triathlon bike sales. So now that I feel like I've identified this weak spot, I wanted to dive a bit deeper into triathlon bikes to see if there were specific items in this category that were underperforming, or if it was just maybe the department as a whole. I wasn't really sure at this point. So I put this second bar chart together, and what I've done here is I filtered it down to display just the triathlon bike data. But later on, if I was maybe interested at looking at mountain or road bikes, I can easily transition. So that's a nice feature with this Tableau program. But I'm just going to leave it on triathlon since that's kind of what I'm looking closely at. And as I can see right away that one of the bikes is doing much better than the other two over every year, and it's this Cervelo P5X bike. And it's pretty consistent over the years. The Diamondback and Specialized bike is definitely underperforming. And what I've done on this worksheet is I applied that toggle filter to the region so I can see if this is maybe like a regional trend or not. So I'll just toggle through so you can see it really isn't a regional trend. Diamondback and Specialized is always lower than Cervelo. So that gave me a kind of a jumping off point for my recommendation. Now that I've zeroed into these underperforming bikes, my initial recommendation was to halt sales of these bikes and maybe just begin that in the southern region since that's where triathlon sales were the lowest, just to get a feel for how that impacts the profits before expanding it nationwide. And I thought that was a strong recommendation, but as I begun to put my story together to present that, I started to uncover some discrepancies that made me think of a second recommendation. And I'll explain that a little more once I get started describing my story. But before I do that, I'd just like to touch on another cool feature with Tableau where you can combine your worksheets to create dashboards. And this allowed me to combine my profit map with my product sales chart. And now I can easily identify on the profit map what state I'm interested in. It might have a lower profit. And when I click it, it automatically updates the information down here in my bar chart to display just what pertains to this state in particular. So just as an example, I picked Tennessee, but I can pick South Carolina since that's an underperforming state here in the South. And I can see triathlon sales are low, but I also see mountain bike sales are low. But road bike sales are still pretty high. I also made a dashboard just to look at the items as well. And let me click off this. What I see, I can kind of do the same thing here, but I'm getting it broken down by items. So I'm getting a little bit more information. So I'll click on Tennessee again like I did before. Seeing my triathlon bikes, that Specialized is pretty low, but actually Diamondback's doing a little bit better than the Cervelo with this state in particular. Go to South Carolina, they haven't even sold the Diamondback or Specialized or anything since 2014. So the data really started to put me on a different path once I started to examine the individual states. And that kind of brings me to my story. And I'm not going to go over kind of these particular sheets again. I'll just kind of get to the meat of the story, which was, I just put a little note here too. It's really to be cautious about making kind of a blanket recommendation without considering those individual states. Because as I put my story together, I wanted to zero in on some of the underperforming states to illustrate why dropping that triathlon bike would be a good suggestion. But what I found was that some of the states have already done that and they're still having some lower sales. And actually, again, we're looking at South Carolina. Their triathlon sales are low, which we expected, and the mountain bike sales are low, which we weren't expecting. But then when you look at Alabama, their mountain bike sales are higher, triathlon bike sales are still low. So that's why I started to consider this state by state basis. Again, here's South Carolina, here's Alabama, just illustrated on its own tab. And then I went ahead and just pulled up Florida because they were the most profitable state in the South. And they were showing kind of the same pattern that I was expecting to see on all the southern states, with the triathlon bike sales really low, road bikes really high, and mountains somewhere in the middle. So this got me reconsidering my initial suggestion to drop the underperforming triathlon bikes. And depending on what the long-term strategy of this business is, I'd also put out there maybe that moving forward, they should consider a product differentiation strategy. Because if we go back to like an earlier worksheet here, we can see that these road bikes are just really the most profitable. And if it's in line with kind of their long-term goals, really focusing on the sales of exclusively road bikes and becoming a leader in that particular category could be another route to go down. Instead of just focusing on dropping what's least profitable, can focus on what's giving us most of our profits. But I realize that that might not be the direction per se that the company wishes to go. And if it's not, I would go ahead with my initial recommendation of dropping the two underperforming triathlon bikes, and I'd begin that in the southern region because that's what's displaying the lowest sales of that particular bike. And then what I'd do is I'd revisit that decision after updating this data with the current data once we drop those bikes, and then make an informed decision on whether to continue that path and expand nationwide, or if we should reconsider at that point. So just touching overall on Tableau, I'm not gonna lie, I did find it a little bit challenging, and I felt like every time I started to identify a trend and really hone in on how to improve profits, another trend would start to emerge. So it definitely takes a lot of time and a lot of practice to understand the program, but I definitely think once you do, it can be really beneficial for businesses. It's customizable, it's informative, and with enough like trial and error, I think anyone can become an expert in it on how to use it appropriately and illustrate their data and get across their recommendations, and also maybe uncover alternative recommendations for different businesses. So that's just kind of explaining what I found and my experience with Tableau, and I really appreciate you taking the time to listen.